Hello and welcome back to the Bookshelf Odyssey. My name is Art and we are exploring my bookshelves today. What I'm doing today is a wrap up of the last 2 weeks worth of reading. I wasn't able to get one out last week as I was out of town, but I got some reading done. It was a lot of fun, some good books I want to talk to you about today. So we've got 4 books I want to catch you up on. First one I finished was called The Turning Point, 1851, a year that changed Charles Dickens and the world. And it was written by Robert Douglas-Fairhurst. And he also wrote a book called Becoming Dickens, which takes a look at Dickens's first adventure into publishing, and is also one that was a pretty good read. This book looks at the year 1851. It's a time of, as the book says, it's a time of radical change in Britain, when industrial advances were being made, a lot of changes in the artistic field, as well as political unrest. There was poverty, there was disease, all these things that all kind of come to a head in 1851, as well as Charles Dickens begins a very significant year in his life, including starting to write one of the greatest books of English literature of all time, Bleak House. So quite the year for Dickens, quite the year for Britain. And the author kind of explores that year in detail, not just about Dickens, but how Dickens relates with his time and all that was happening during that time. It was a very good read. I really enjoyed it. It was well written, somewhat entertaining, but certainly very informational. I don't think the author is writing to entertain as so much as he is to inform, but for those who are big fans of Dickens and his life and find his life fascinating, this is an excellent biography to pick up. I kind of like the idea of taking a micro look at just 1 year of an author's life, and the way it compares it to society. I thought that was really fascinating. So in the end, I'll be looking for more books written by him, especially if they're connected to Dickens. But yeah, it was a book I greatly enjoyed and would recommend if you want to read more about Charles Dickens. The second book I read is probably about as different from the first one as you can get. It's called Dead Silence, and it's by S.A. Barnes. And the book describes itself as Titanic meets Event Horizon, and it's also described as a science fiction horror novel, which was right up my alley, apparently. It was a great read. It tells the story of a woman and her crew that find a decades lost luxury cruiser spaceship, and they find that it's a complete wreck, that some kind of nightmarish thing happened inside. There's dead bodies everywhere, and they begin to see ghosts, possibly. There's a lot of ghostly parts that as they explore the ghost ship. And I don't know, it really was like somebody took a horror novel and a sci-fi novel and just smashed it together, which I really enjoyed, because often in science fiction you don't always get the possibility of ghosts and goblins, because it's all they explain it away with science. But this book leaves you enough open that you really wonder. And there are some great scary scenes in it. The main characters are interesting. The journey they go on, the overall sense of feeling trapped and claustrophobic because they're in space, and well, as the movie said, in space no one can hear you scream. It was a delight. So a little bit on the graphic side as far as gore goes, but that doesn't bother me as much, and I really enjoyed the story. And so the plot that drives them is that the main character, Claire, her and her crew realized that if they could salvage this ghost ship, that could really set them up for financial success. But as the book itself says, a quick search of the ship reveals something isn't right. Whispers in the dark, flickers of movement, messages scrawled in blood. Claire must fight to hold on to her sanity and find out what really happened on the Aurora before she and her crew meet the same ghastly fate. So yeah, I haven't read anything by S.A. Barnes. This is my first of her books. It looks like, although now that I look, I think this is her only book. This was published in February of 2022, and so it's a new book, a new author, and I'll be really looking forward to seeing what else she might write. And then I did a reread of a fantasy novel, one of my all-time favorite series. And it's called White Knight by Jim Butcher. It's part of the Harry Dresden series. If you haven't read the Harry Dresden series, then you'd be in for a treat, especially if you like urban fantasy. I have a lot of hit and miss with fantasy, especially the Lord of the Rings kind of fantasy. I guess that's called high fantasy. I more often than not find those books and those kinds of books a slog to get through. But White Knight is like, if you like, well, I guess to continue the idea of mashing up different themes, the Harry Dresden series is like a mashup of Han Solo with Gandalf, set in like an old pulp Bob the Skull, and Harry's friend who's in the corner, who loves polka music. He's great. Butters is his name, and he's a great character. Harry, of course, is a wonderful character. He's a very flawed character, and I know some people have a problem with the series that he tends to objectify women a bit. He has kind of a, well, in this case, this story really kind of picks at that, this knight in shining armor idea when it comes to women, that they need to be rescued. And he often will describe women based on how attractive they are. And I can see why that can be kind of problematic for people. To be fair, though, he's often called out on that, and that some of those things people say, that's really that's not the right point of view to have. And so he's flawed, but you can chart his growth throughout the series, and I feel like it does get better at that. But that also kind of taps into the kind of style of genre that Jim Butcher is writing in, both the old pulpy detective novel as well as the urban fantasy kind of sexy vibe storytelling. I think it's true to the nature of what he's trying to write in. That being said, I can understand why, especially women readers would get tired of him always describing the characters' bodies and how hot they are, and those things. But I get it. But I really enjoyed the series overall. Jim Butcher is a fantastic storyteller. I would certainly recommend the audiobooks. I've been going back through and listening to the audiobook versions because it's narrated by James Marsters, who played Spike on Buffy and is one of my favorite character actors, and he does a great job with this series, and it makes the audiobooks worth listening to. But in White Knight, to get back to the book itself, meet Harry Dresden, Chicago's first and only wizard PI. Turns out the everyday world is full of strange and magical things, and most of them don't play well with humans. That's where Harry comes in. A series of apparent suicides rings alarm bells with the police, and Harry is hired. At the first crime scene, he hits pay dirt, discovering an unmistakable magical taint. There's also a message especially for him, and it ain't pretty. The killings will continue if Harry can't halt his tormentor, but the evidence implicates his half-brother, which just doesn't add up. Unfortunately, Harry's digging around attracts some powerful vampires with a stake in the result. Soon, whichever way he turns, Harry will find himself outnumbered, outclassed, and dangerously susceptible to temptation. And if he screws up, his friends will die. Magic, it can get a guy killed. And this book is really beginning a kind of a turning point for Harry, as he's taken on an apprentice who's the daughter of a friend of his, and Molly, it will really come into a more a very prominent role in the series ahead. And you begin to explore this idea of Harry as a mentor, whereas before he was pretty much a carefree, care for myself kind of person. And now he's got more and more people that he is caring about. So the mystery itself is really great, and I love the mashup again of different genres. You know, the last one we had kind of a sci-fi horror. This one is a fantasy mystery, and I really like that. I like it when genres collide like that. I of course would recommend the Dresden series. At the end of the day, Harry is a hero, and he cares for the people that he is tasked to protect. As flawed as he is sometimes, he will always do the right thing. You can count on that, even if it's hard, even if in the end it could mean his own death. He does what's right, and I appreciate that in a hero. And then one more book. I read a classic Victorian story by Charles Dickens. It's called Mugby Junction. It was a Christmas release of short stories that take place all around this train station called Mugby Junction. Dickens wrote the first handful of stories that kind of sets up the world and sets up the train station. We follow a unnamed narrator who gets off at Mugby Junction. We find out that he is trying to flee from his birthday, meets some of the characters in town. It's very strange, I guess, to put it mildly. First couple of stories, like I said, follows this unnamed narrator who the stories are called Barbox Brothers and Barbox Brothers and Company, and it shows here this man who feels like he is without a home, and he comes to see Mugby Junction as his home, and then he's compiling in this story, in this book, different stories that he's picked up. And then one of the stories in the book is one that's very familiar. It's called The Signalman. I read this story back in October, I think it was, on the YouTube channel, so you can find it here. Then Dickens had some other authors write some other short stories and combine it into one book. So it's like a collection of short stories that are loosely connected, almost like the Martian Chronicles or something like that. And I would recommend you read it if you want to explore some of Dickens's short stories and short writing. Some of the stories that he wrote I hadn't read before, so that was enjoyable. When you do look for the book, make sure you get the full story, because a lot of the editions I found, like on Kindle, only have Dickens's stories in it, and there are 4 other stories that I think are well worth reading. But these stories are not Christmassy at all. In fact, a couple of them are ghost stories, which is what Victorians would read at Christmas time next to the fireplace around the family hearth. So I loved The Signalman. It's a classic ghost story of a train worker who, whenever he sees this ghostly apparition, something bad happens on the train route, and he tells the narrator about his experiences, and he just saw the third. He just saw it for a third time, and so he wonders what it could mean and what sort of tragedy could be coming. And it's just a slow build of tension that is just beautifully executed at the end. The other stories included in this collection are The Engine Driver by Andrew Halliday, which was a neat story. Mostly it's just like talking to the engine driver about different things he's experienced and seen on the rails. And then The Compensation House, and that one was a little bit of a spookier story. The Compensation House is by Charles Collins. Then we get The Traveling Post Office by Hesba Stretton, and then The Engineer by Amelia B. Edwards. And they were all enjoyable to read. None of them as classic as The Signalman, but it was well worth the reading. And so I would make sure when you go to find this book that you make sure that all the stories are in it. I said I had read 4. It's actually 5. I just finished a book, and it's called Save Me from Dangerous Men by S.A. Lelchuk. And it is the first book in the Nicky Griffin series. This was a great read, about a private investigator who's not your typical private investigator. She's like a private investigator who owns a bookstore, but there's a very dark side to her. It says this on the book: in her office above her bookstore's shelves and stacks, where she luxuriates in books and the comfort they provide, she also tracks certain men, dangerous men who have hurt the women they claim to love. And Nikki likes to teach those men a lesson, to teach them what it feels like to be hurt and helpless, so she can be sure that their victims are safe from them forever. And then the story itself is set up. She gets involved in a tech company. There's a murder. There's some kind of a big event that's being planned that could take a lot of people's lives, and she's uncovering this deeper mystery in this job she gets hired to do. The book itself, it's funny how we kind of describe mashups to describe books. So this book describes itself as part Lisbeth Salander, part Jack Reacher, and part Jessica Jones. I can't say for sure about the first one, but this is definitely kind of a Jack Reacher, Jessica Jones kind of vibe. And I really enjoyed reading it. Nikki gets into some very dark moments. She's definitely a broken person. It's kind of the anti-hero, like think Dexter, although not quite as psychotic. She will often, to protect a woman who comes to her who's been beaten or abused by a man, the book's not wrong. She loves to teach them a lesson, to let them know what it feels like to be helpless, like they have made the women in their lives feel helpless. So what's interesting is, this is a book that I think obviously would appeal to women, but it was written by a man. And all I can do from my perspective, is to share my thoughts on it. And, guys, we need to treat women better, or else Nikki's going to come for you. Okay. But I read the audiobook, so I'd recommend the audiobook version. It is narrated by January Lavoie, who did a fantastic job with that book. All right, so those are the 5 books I read this past 2 weeks. And I'm just looking at some stats here, and it looks like in January, I actually finished 19 books in January, which is one of the best reading months I've had as far as numbers go. That's a lot of them were audiobook again, and then I've finished 2 just in February. So I'm expecting February will be kind of a slower month as far as reading goes. A couple other things to just update real quick on my reading week. I did not get any reading done in Emma, and I don't know why. It's just taken me so long to get into it. Whenever I pick it up, I enjoy it, but I just haven't been making the time to get into it. So I don't know, maybe I'll have to carve out a day to get through a couple of chapters on that. But so I haven't anything to update there. Also, if you are interested in being a part of the Ray Bradbury Short Story Club, I've really kind of wobbled and failed on any kind of organization on that. So sorry about all that if you're eagerly wanting to read along with me. This month I've been kind of thinking about it and about what to do and how to do it, and I might kind of change that up a little bit about how I'm approaching it. So I'm rethinking that right now. So stay tuned on that. It's something I really want to do. I think I'm just struggling to know how to best do it. So I'll probably have a video on that coming out here real soon. So you'll want to keep an eye out for that. That's been my reading week, and let me know what you've been reading these last couple weeks, what you'd recommend to me. We'll keep the conversation going in the comments below. And until next time, happy reading, everyone. Take care.